name is Lilah Anderson, and I'm the Educator of Visual Literacy and Learning for University Museums. I'm here today with Lynette Pohlman, Director and Chief Curator of the University Museums, and we're going to talk about the Murals cycle that was directed by Grant Wood here in Parks Library. So I want to start off, and Lynette is going to talk about campus aesthetic and really how these murals fit into that history.
Campus aesthetics at Iowa State was a planned educational aesthetic resource from the very beginning. We often think that having a beautiful campus was a happy accident. It wasn't. This mural came 75, 80 years after we were founded, and it was the latest thing in the 1930s, but the aesthetics began in 1858. To create a beautiful campus was to inspire learning, and creating a beautiful space that would inspire that learning was the most important part of having beauty incorporated. The notion of beauty and the notion of intellectualism was combined by our early founders, as well as our first president, Adonijah Welch. If you fast forward to the Great Depression, it was Raymond Hughes who became president in 1927. When he arrived, and he was a chemist by training, he wanted to create aesthetic objects. At that time we had beautiful buildings, we had lovely landscape, but he wanted to also bring aesthetic objects into use at Iowa State. One of his first acts when coming to campus in 1927 and 28 was to establish the Art Committee of Iowa State, and he made himself chair of that. That connotates the impact and the importance of what he viewed for the role of the arts, humanities, and scientists at Iowa State. Hughes went around campus at that time and decided where were some of the newer buildings that were being built and where would artwork be located. He identified in the Dairy Courtyard where a cycle of murals would be outside. He defined in this Parks Library where this cycle of murals might be located. At the time, they were blank walls as drawn by the architect. He was planning with the Carnegie Foundation to commission a cycle of murals. He took advantage of the federal WPA program when it came along. It was a program to employ artists, as that federal program was for everyone, to employ so many people. Just as today when we have the pandemic, it is about employment and taking care of people first. And that included the artists. Grant Wood was Iowa's most significant artist. This was commissioned only 3 years after he did American Gothic, one of the most reproduced and known works of art in the world. Grant Wood was a very significant artist. He grew up in knowing the mural tradition and being a master artisan and a master painter. And so to work with a group of people, as he did here, to create his vision was how we came to have Breaking the Prairie Sod, which is behind us, but also when we go up the stairs a little bit later, when tillage begins, the other arts will follow. It was from Grant Wood and then Christian Peterson to join the PWPA that set Iowa State on to really creating a world-class and large art on campus collection, which now numbers over 2,500 works of art. During the WPA and the WPA following that, and the Peterson years, 12 major site-specific works of art were created on campus. And you can see in the last 30 years, there's been many, many thousands, literally, added to that tradition. But that tradition is embedded in the early tradition of the 1850s of the role of beauty, aesthetics conjoined with science to inspire learning and to create an environment where our students go out and contribute to the world in not only their scientific expertise, their engineering expertise, but their ability to solve problems, the world's problems. And our art collection communicates ideas, concepts, and values that we all carry with us. That's the reason we have an Art on Campus collection. It is for the educational value and the uplifting quality of the human heart that we have this collection. I'm excited to give you a tour of this particular object. It's important, and we use it often for many of our classes because it is narrative and it is somewhat familiar. We as viewers of art are always comfortable when we can look and say, that's a person, this is a landscape. This is not about abstraction. This mural is very stylized, but it is not a hard mural to interpret, but yet there is a lot of information. We even wrote a book on this particular mural of 350 pages. Most people look at a work of art for 8 seconds and think they know everything that's in it. I guarantee you by the time you get done with this, there will be concepts that you will not have seen before. I have probably given this tour more than 5,000 times, and every time an Iowa State student comes up with something else in content that I have not seen before. Good, excellent works of art have a lot of content. It is the responsibility of our curiosity, our discovery, and our engagement. In other words, visual literacy and learning to come to that. So when I often am in this space with students, they are in your location, and I ask them to look and scan this mural. First of all, only giving me the data, what is just what you see, the interpretation, and then the evaluation. Most students start immediately by giving the interpretation and their personal opinion, like I like or I don't. So correct yourself as we go forward. This is only about the data. And then one of the easiest ways to do that on this mural and any other work of art you do, it is about asking questions. In this case, how many horses are there that are depicted? How many oxen are there? How many landscapes are there? How many trees are here? You get the idea. How many clouds are there in the sky? This allows your eye to scan the mural and to keep scanning. Oftentimes I will go on a diagonal and just looking for objects, just looking for what is there until I think I have at least looked at everything. I may also be looking for the color. How many colors are in this mural? What time was it done? You can tell almost to the year if you just analyze composition. After we have done the group think, and that's perfectly acceptable in visual literacy. What do you know and what do your student colleagues know? We go to interpretation, and that's especially helpful in interpretation. And I'll ask additional questions. Who's the man? What's his name? Who's the woman? Who's the young boy? You have to agree that there's a young boy because that is an interpretation. What are they doing? When we start, for example, delving into some of those interpretations, we will often get to who the man is likely Abraham Lincoln in youth maturity, and who was he? And why was he here depicted at the front door of the library? Why is he depicted here doing physical labor on the farm? Who was he? The students will respond that he was the president. What was he known for? Emancipation Act. What else did he do in that same week? He signed the Moral Act, which was later assigned to Iowa State. Much of our early history is related to the Moral Act and to Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln owned land in Iowa, made him an Iowan by proxy, if you will. He gave us an educational form through his legislation and those of others that took and professionalized farming, engineering, and the humanities. He added this scope of educational access to the middle class. He elevated people from the farming community to have a profession. And we see that today in our science that is worldwide impact. That began with Abraham Lincoln and his colleagues that saw this need for an educational system that encompassed and included everybody. Who else is in this mural? There is a woman, and what is she doing? And again, you're looking closely. You're probably noticing that she has leather on her arm, and she has a bonnet. I'll move on, and when we talk about the interpretation here, I'll ask, there are 3 landscapes. Can you put the 3 landscapes, put dates on the 3 landscapes? And if you really analyze each of these landscapes, they're very telling. The first one has the oxen, the 10 oxen. That refers probably back to the founding of the state of Iowa, being found in agriculture through white settlement. And oxen were used to till the ground. That would have been a high prairie ground at that time. The next midsection is with the horses, and that's a depiction of probably about the 1870s when the John Deere plow came in and allowed for a singular person to plow much more land with 3 horses and 1 plow than had been done 40 years earlier with the 10 oxen. That's a technology change. It's like going from the pencil to the computer. It's a huge change in terms of how the United States progressed forward. And the last time period that we see here is in the clouds. The clouds are reminiscent of the 1930s and the streamlined design of railroad cars, architectural buildings, etc. Why were those 3 time periods important? Well, obviously they're a reflection to the founding of the state of Iowa. Then we're reflecting on the founding of Iowa State. Why isn't the young man that's in the oxen vignette, why is he not in the 1870s vignette? Because he's in college. He came to Iowa State. Or that's my interpretation. And when you start putting then the clouds in the 1930s, what was happening, the students loved talking and trying to think what was going on in the 1930s. This was their grandparents' era at best. And it was the precursor to war. It was the Great Depression. There was famine, financial hardship. If you lived in the Midwest, if you lived in Iowa, which 98% of the students at that time were from Iowa, the state of Iowa, they certainly had food, more than in most places in urban areas. But they did remember hardships. They have family stories of the hardships. And when we think, what's happening with those clouds? What's next? This is part of still the interpretation. And it's almost like the storm coming in. If you are attuned to the weather, when you see clouds rolling in banks like that, you think, ooh, storm is brewing. Take shelter, at least beware, be cautious. And when Grant Wood designed this in 1936 and 37, the United States had not entered the war, had not entered into the conflict in Europe. Something's brewing. They didn't know the answer to that at the time. They knew they were in the Dust Bowl, they knew they were in the Great Depression, they knew they were in hard times, but they really didn't even understand the full magnitude of what's to come. This mural is, in a condensed version, a short history of white settlement in Iowa till the 1930s. And the role of education, you can read between the lines and how that changed the course of human history, let alone Iowa history and the United States history. In visual literacy, the last step then is evaluation. People will say, and this is where you want people to give their personal taste, their personal opinion. It can be all over the board. And oftentimes you see a great distinction from when you start the visual literacy to the end. People will look at this in 10 seconds as they're gathering for class and say, I don't like it. It's old-fashioned. The colors. There's 7 colors here. They didn't have a clue there were 7 colors here. They didn't understand the depth of what is here. When you get to evaluation after you have done visual literacy, you still may not personally think it is an aesthetic experience that is you would put in your living room. That's not the question at Iowa State, it's whether you understand it. And that's what all of the works of art at Iowa State are about. Do you understand it? Have you taken the time, the mental capacity, and the emotional capacity to come to understanding and transfer those thoughts and ideas into making you a more expansive personality? So whatever the evaluation is, it's very acceptable, but almost always people agree they've had the aha moment. I understand more, and I have far more to learn.
One of the things I find really spectacular about this mural is the specificity and exactness and well thought out research of the items that Grant Wood includes. As someone that studied biology and botany, one of the things that I like to look at and focus in on is the wildflowers that are down at the bottom. And I do tell students when we talk about this mural to say, where are we? And you can guess we're in Iowa, but the flora that's here really does clue you into these are very specific Midwestern Iowan flowers that we're seeing. He's included spring ephemerals like the jack in the pulpit, the trillium, the Virginia bluebells. These are blooming right now. So we can even get a sense of season. I mean, these are flowers that are blooming just for a few short weeks in April or May. So, you know, here we have the Solomon seal, the May apple, and that the ability that I can identify these plants and know very specifically what they are, I think is a credit to Wood in the way that he's designed these murals and done the research to make sure that it's very accurate. Another indicator we have of the time period of this mural is the cherry blossoms blooming along here. And then also the willow sticks that they carry are, again, something that are being used in the springtime. Another tiny detail that I think, again, is just important and shows that thoughtfulness and that research and really the ability to create a sense of place in a very specific place and time and moment is, you can see in the clothing that here the suspender is held up by a nail. We can look at the woman's bonnet and that her leather sleeves and how those are indicating that she is probably cooking over, she's not using our conventional gas range, right? She's cooking over an open fire, and those are, or a coal stove or something where she needs to have protection for her arms. So I think the specificity of these small details really brings this to life, and again, is part of how we can look at this for so many times. We can look at it over decades and find new things and see new details. So as we close in looking at this mural, and Lynette really touched on it in a lot of ways of having Lincoln here, but this was a main thoroughfare of students walking through this area, and ultimately this was a work of art that was funded through the WPA, through the PWAP, and really it has a point, it has a message in almost kind of a propaganda-like way. You can see here these students walking by can say, if I work hard, if I'm diligent, if I study, if I come here and learn to innovate, I too have the possibility of becoming a president of the United States. I mean, there's definitely a message here and something that Grant Wood is wanting to convey through this mural cycle.
Remember, you can look at this mural for decades and find new thoughts, ideas, and emotions. And that's your challenge. You must maintain your curiosity, your innovation. It is not just up to an art historian, such as myself, standing in front of you and providing you this information. It's your responsibility, as it is every Iowa State University student responsibility, to actually put the thought and the effort to come to understanding. So as much thought as you put into your chemistry class, put into looking at public art, visual literacy. Thank you.